The throne room of the Zephyrian flagship was a place of cold beauty and terrible silence. Walls of black crystal stretched upward into shadow, decorated with geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long. At the center of it all sat Emperor Vexthul, ancient beyond measure, his pale blue skin stretched tight over a frame that had not moved from that throne in over a century. Karolina stood before him, her hands bound, but her violin case still clutched against her chest. The Zephyrians had taken their weapons, but left them their instruments, not understanding that for humans there was no difference between the two. Marcus, Elena, and Sam stood beside her, their own instruments held like shields against the oppressive atmosphere of the ship. Around them, hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers waited in perfect silence, their emotionless faces turned toward their ancient ruler. "So," the Emperor said, his voice like winter wind across dead stone, "these are the humans who have caused us so much trouble. The ones who fight with noise and chaos instead of proper weapons." Karolina looked up at the being who had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for 3,000 years. He was tall and thin, with large black eyes that seemed to see everything and feel nothing. His hands, folded in his lap, had not moved in so long that dust had settled on them. "We fight with music," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "We fight with the part of ourselves that you threw away." Emperor Vexthul tilted his head slightly, the first movement he had made since they entered the room. "Threw away? We evolved beyond such primitive impulses. We became efficient, logical, pure. Your species clings to the emotional chaos that we wisely abandoned." "Then how has that worked out for you?" Marcus asked, his usual humor replaced by something harder. "You've conquered half the galaxy, but you can't understand why a 19-year-old girl with a violin keeps beating your armies, the Emperor's." Eyes narrowed. "You have delayed the inevitable, nothing more. In 6 hours, our fleet will destroy your whole world. Your musical resistance will die with it, and the galaxy will finally know the peace of silence." Karolina opened her violin case and lifted out her grandmother's instrument. Immediately, dozens of weapons turned toward her, but the Emperor raised one dusty hand. "Let her play," he said. "I am curious to understand what makes her noise so effective against minds weaker than mine." She placed the violin under her chin and closed her eyes. For a moment, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The children in the refugee center who had forgotten how to hope. The world she had helped liberate with nothing but music and determination. The friends who had stood by her through 2 years of impossible war. And then she began to play. The melody that came from her violin was unlike anything she had ever played before. It started soft and simple, like a lullaby her grandmother might have sung, but it carried within it the weight of human history. Every joy and sorrow, every triumph and tragedy, every moment when someone had chosen to keep going when giving up would have been easier. The music filled the throne room, flowing around the crystal walls and reflecting back in harmonies that seemed to come from the ship itself. But more than that, it filled the spaces between notes with something the Zephyrians had not felt in millennia. The simple, complicated, messy reality of being alive and caring about something beyond pure logic. Emperor Vexthul sat perfectly still, but Karolina could see something changing in his ancient eyes. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been pain. "Stop," he whispered, but Karolina played on, and now her friends joined her. Marcus added a rhythm that spoke of heartbeats and footsteps and the endless march of life through time. Elena's flute sang of love lost and found, of children laughing and parents crying with joy. Sam's bass provided the foundation, the deep strength that held communities together through the worst storms. Together, their music painted a picture of what the Zephyrians had been before they chose silence over song. A picture of a people who had once felt deeply, loved fiercely, and created beauty for its own sake, the emperor's perfectly controlled composure began to crack. His hands, motionless for decades, began to tremble. Dust fell from his robes as his chest rose and fell with breathing that had become ragged and desperate. I said, "Stop," he commanded, but his voice broke on the words. Around the throne room, something unprecedented was happening. Zephyrian soldiers, who had stood like statues for hours, began to move. Some dropped their weapons. Others reached out to touch each other's faces, as if seeing their comrades for the first time. A few began to make sounds that their species had not uttered in centuries, sounds of wonder, of sorrow, of recognition. The music was not just reaching the emperor. It was spreading through the ship's communication system, carried on frequencies that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the parts of the Zephyrian mind that had been locked away but never truly destroyed. "You don't understand," the emperor gasped, rising from his throne for the first time in 100 years. "We had to give up emotion. We had to choose logic over feeling. The wars, the chaos, the pain, emotion nearly destroyed us." Karolina looked at him with eyes full of compassion. "And what did silence give you instead? You conquered worlds, but you lost yourselves. You gained an empire, but you forgot why empires are worth having." Her violin sang with a new theme now, one that spoke of redemption and second chances. The melody wrapped around the emperor like arms offering comfort to someone who had been cold for far too long. "We remember," he whispered, and tears began to fall from his ancient eyes, the first tears a Zephyrian had shed in 3,000 years. "By the stars, we remember what we were." The transformation spread throughout the ship like ripples in a pond. In the engine rooms, Zephyrian workers stopped their tasks and began to hum along with the music. In the weapons bays, soldiers laid down their arms and embraced each other. In the communication centers, officers began broadcasting the music to the rest of the fleet instead of battle orders. On the bridge, Admiral Vekler, the Emperor's most trusted commander, felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was gone forever. He looked at the tactical display showing Earth, defenseless and waiting for destruction, and made a choice that would have been impossible just moments before. Instead of giving the order to attack, he opened communication channels to every ship in the fleet. "All vessels," he announced, his voice thick with newly remembered emotion, "stand down. Repeat, all vessels stand down. We are ... we are going home." 10,000 Zephyrian ships, poised to destroy humanity's homeworld, simply stopped. Their crews, overwhelmed by the return of feelings they had forgotten they possessed, began the long process of remembering what it meant to be alive instead of merely existing. Emperor Vexthil collapsed back onto his throne, but now he was smiling through his tears. "What have you done to us?" he asked, but there was wonder in his voice instead of anger. "We gave you back what was always yours," Karolina replied, finally lowering her violin. "We reminded you that feeling things, even painful things, is what makes life worth living." The war was over, but more importantly, it had ended with transformation instead of destruction. The Zephyrian Empire would need time to rebuild itself around emotion instead of pure logic, to learn again how to create instead of just conquer. But they would have that time, because humanity had chosen to heal rather than destroy their enemy. Years later, Karolina would return to New Vienna Station as the director of the Galactic Conservatory. Students from dozens of species would come to learn that music was not just entertainment, but a bridge between hearts and minds across the universe. In the memorial garden outside the conservatory, a simple stone bore the inscription, "Always," a promise that no matter how dark the galaxy became, no matter how powerful the forces of silence and despair, the human spirit would endure. It would sing, it would hope, it would refuse to surrender. And somewhere among the stars, On worlds both human and alien, children would grow up learning that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not a gun or a bomb or a planet-destroying machine. It was a song, played with love, by someone who refused to give up. The music would always continue. The hope would always endure. And the galaxy would always remember the day that a 19-year-old girl with her grandmother's violin taught an ancient empire how to feel again. Always. Dr. Lisa Chun stared at the medical scanner results for the third time, unable to believe what she was seeing. The readings made no sense according to everything she knew about human biology. But the evidence was right there in front of her. Glowing on the screen of her laboratory aboard the research vessel Aurora. Jake Martinez lay unconscious on the medical bed, barely alive after his rescue from the mining planet. He was the only survivor found at the entire facility, discovered 3 days after the attack in the ruins of what used to be a concrete bunker. His team and every other human on the planet had vanished without a trace. His brain activity is off the charts, Lisa muttered to herself, making notes on her tablet. But not in a way that suggests damage. It's more like his mind is burning, brighter than normal. She had been studying the few survivors from other attacks across human space for the past 2 weeks. The pattern was always the same. Entire colonies would go silent overnight. When rescue ships arrived, they would find empty settlements with no bodies, no signs of struggle, just strange scorch marks on the ground that formed unusual patterns. Jake was different. He had been found surrounded by similar scorch marks, but instead of being drained like the others, he seemed to be radiating some kind of energy that her instruments could barely measure. The laboratory door opened, and Captain Ryan Foster walked in. The tall Marine officer looked tired and worried, which was unusual for someone known for staying calm under pressure. He commanded the Aurora's small security force and had been trying to make sense of the attacks, just like Lisa. "Any progress with the survivor?" Ryan asked, looking down at Jake's still form. "Yes and no," Lisa replied. "His body is healing faster than should be possible. The injuries he sustained would normally take months to recover from, but he's already showing significant improvement after just 3 days. That's good news, right? Maybe, but there's something else. Look at this." Lisa pulled up a series of images on her screen. These are thermal scans of his body. See how his core temperature is higher than normal. And look at these readings from his nervous system. Ryan studied the images, though he had to admit most of the medical information went over his head. What am I looking at? Energy patterns I've never seen before in a human being. It's like there's something burning inside him, but not in a harmful way. More like a controlled fire that's making him stronger. Before Ryan could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The red emergency lights started flashing, and the ship's communication system crackled to life. "All hands to battle stations. We have incoming vessels of unknown design. Repeat, unknown vessels approaching fast." Ryan grabbed his weapon and headed for the door. "Stay with the patient, Doc. If those things are what I think they are, we're going to need every advantage we can get." Lisa nodded and turned back to her instruments, but Jake's eyes suddenly opened. He sat up quickly, looking around the room with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough from days of unconsciousness. "You're safe," Lisa said, moving to his side. "You're aboard the Aurora. Do you remember what happened on the mining planet?" Jake's face went pale as the memories came flooding back. "The shadow creatures. They killed everyone. My team, the miners, everyone." He looked at his hands, flexing his fingers. "But they couldn't drain me." "Why couldn't they drain me?" Before Lisa could answer, the ship shook violently. Through the small window in the laboratory, they could see shapes moving in space. Dark forms surrounded by crimson light, just like Jake had described from his attack. "They followed us," Jake whispered. They can track survivors somehow. The ship's weapons began firing, bright streams of energy lancing out toward the attackers. But just like on the mining planet, the weapons seemed to have no effect. The shadow creatures flowed around the energy blasts, like water flowing around. "Rox, we have to get to the others," Jake said, standing up from the medical bed. He was wearing only a hospital gown, but he moved with strength that surprised Lisa. "You should rest. You've been unconscious for 3 days. There's no time for rest. Those things are here because of me, and I might be the only one who can fight them." Another violent shake knocked both of them against the wall. Emergency lighting kicked in as the main power flickered. Through the ship's communication system, they could hear Ryan's voice giving orders to his Marines. "All units, fall back to Section 7. Standard weapons are ineffective. Repeat, standard weapons are ineffective against these targets." Jake and Lisa made their way through the corridors toward the main deck. They passed crew members running in the opposite direction, fear clear on their faces. Some were carrying wounded, others were just running blindly. When they reached the main deck, they found Ryan and his Marines forming a defensive line near the ship's central hub. The shadow creatures had somehow gotten inside the Aurora and were moving through the corridors like living smoke. "Captain," Lisa called out, "Jake is awake. He might know how to fight these things." Ryan looked over at them, relief and desperation mixed on his face. "Any ideas would be welcome right about now, Lieutenant. Our weapons are useless." Jake watched the creatures approaching their position. They moved with the same flowing motion. He remembered, but now he could see something else about them. There was a hunger in the way they moved, but also a kind of sadness, like they were being forced to do something they did not want to do. "They feed on life energy," Jake said. "But there's something about human life energy they want more than other species. I could feel it when one of them tried to drain me." "What stopped it?" Ryan asked, firing another useless blast at the nearest creature. "I don't know exactly, but when it touched me, I felt something push back, like there was a fire inside me that burned it." As if responding to his words, Jake felt that same warmth beginning to build in his chest. It started small, like a candle flame, but quickly grew stronger. He could feel it spreading through his body, making him feel more alive than he had ever felt before. One of the creatures reached the Marine defensive line and stretched out, its hand toward a young soldier named Pete Wilson. Jake watched in horror as Pete began to collapse, his life draining away just like the miners on the planet. Without thinking, Jake ran forward and grabbed the creature's arm. The moment his skin made contact, the warmth inside him exploded outward. Crimson light surrounded both Jake and the creature, but this light was different from the cold red energy of the attackers. This light was warm, alive, burning with something that felt like hope. The creature screamed, a sound like glass breaking mixed with wind howling through empty spaces. It pulled away from Jake and retreated, moving faster than it had before. The other creatures also backed away, as if Jake had become something dangerous to them. Jake looked down at his hands. They were glowing with soft red light, the same warm crimson that had surrounded him moments before. He could feel the fire inside him still burning, but it did not hurt. Instead, it made him feel strong and confident. "Well," Ryan said, staring at Jake's glowing hands, "that's definitely something we can work with." The creatures had retreated to the far end of the corridor, but they had not left the ship. They stayed at a distance, watching Jake with what looked like a mixture of hunger and fear. "They're afraid of whatever this is," Jake said, holding up his glowing hands. "But they still want to feed. They're stuck between being hungry and being scared." Lisa was already scanning Jake with a handheld device. "The energy readings are incredible. Whatever happened to you, it's made you into something they can't easily drain." "The question is," Ryan said, Can we figure out how to make this happen to other people? Because if those things are spreading across human space, we're going to need more than one person who can fight them. Jake looked at his hands again, watching the warm light pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. He thought about his dead teammates, about all the people who had been drained by these creatures across dozens of worlds. The fire inside him burned brighter. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We have to." Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of the battleship New York, watching the holographic display that showed the current state of human space. Red markers indicated worlds that had gone silent in the past month. There were too many to count. "Ma'am, we're receiving another distress signal," reported Lieutenant Commander Tony Reed from the communications station. "This time from the farming colony on Harvest Prime. Same pattern as all the others. Shadow creatures, portals in the sky, complete loss of contact within hours." Kate stared at the display, her jaw tight with frustration. In her 30 years of military service, she had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that could not be shot, could not be reasoned with, and seemed to specifically target human settlements while leaving other alien colonies alone. "What's our response time to Harvest Prime?" she asked. 18 hours at maximum speed," replied her navigation. "Officer, too long. By the time we get there, it'll be over." Kate turned to face the room. "Send word to all human fleet commanders. We're pulling back our scattered forces and consolidating at strategic points. No more trying to chase these things around the galaxy." The door to the command center opened, and Jake Martinez walked in, followed by Dr. Lisa Chun. Jake looked different than he had just 2 weeks ago. There was something in his eyes now, a kind of inner fire that seemed to burn just beneath the surface. Lisa carried a tablet full of data from her ongoing research. "Admiral," Jake said, saluting, "we have something you need to see." Kate had been working closely with Jake since his rescue from the mining planet. He was the only person they knew who could consistently fight the shadow creatures. But one person could not save entire worlds. "Show me," Kate said. Lisa activated her tablet and projected a series of images into the air above the central table. "We've been studying Jake's condition for 2 weeks now. The energy he produces seems to be connected to intense emotional states, particularly determination and the refusal to give up." "We already knew that," Kate said. "What's new?" "We think we can teach it to others," Jake said. "But it's not easy, and it comes with a price." Jake held out his hand and concentrated. Slowly, warm red light began to glow around his fingers. The light was beautiful, but also somehow fierce, like a flame that refused to be put out no matter how strong the wind. "The light comes from something inside humans that the aliens don't have," Lisa explained. "We're calling it soul fire. It's like a person's will to live and protect others, made visible and given power." "Can you demonstrate this on someone else?" Kate asked. A young Marine named Carl Davis stepped forward. He had volunteered for Lisa's experiments, knowing the risks. Carl was barely 20 years old, fresh out of training, but he had lost his entire family when his home colony was attacked. "The key is not trying to make the light appear," Jake said, placing his hand on Carl's shoulder. "The key is remembering why you refuse to give up. What are you fighting for? What are you protecting?" Carl closed his eyes, and Kate could see him thinking. His face went through a series of emotions: sadness, anger, determination. Slowly, very faintly, a red glow began to appear around his hands. "I can feel it," Carl whispered. "It's like a fire, but it doesn't burn. It feels warm and strong." The glow grew brighter for a few seconds, and flickered and died. Carl swayed on his feet, and Jake caught him before he could fall. "The first time takes a lot out of you," Jake explained. "But with practice, it gets easier." The problem is that using this power ages you faster than normal. Every time you call on the soul fire, you're burning part of your life force. Kate looked at Jake more carefully. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see that he looked older than his 28 years. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there before, and his hair was starting to show gray at the temples. "How much does it cost?" she asked. "Hard to say exactly," Lisa replied. "Based on our tests, heavy use of soul fire might reduce a person's lifespan by 10 or 15 years. But without it, we have no defense against these creatures at all." Before Kate could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Tony Reed's voice called out over the noise. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Unknown ship designs, moving fast toward our position." Kate looked at the tactical display and felt her blood run cold. Dozens of dark shapes were approaching the fleet, surrounded by the familiar crimson energy of the shadow creatures. But these were not just individual beings. These were ships, if they could be called that. Dark vessels that seemed to bend light. Around them, making them hard to see clearly. "All ships, battle stations," Kate ordered. "Prepare for engagement." The shadow ships moved unlike anything Kate had ever seen. They flowed through space like living things, changing direction without turning, accelerating without visible engines. When they opened fire, streams of crimson energy lanced out toward the human fleet. The energy beams passed right through the shields of the human ships, as if the shields were not there. Wherever the beams touched the hull, the metal began to corrode and crack. Worse, Kate could see crew members collapsing on ships that had been hit, drained of life, just like the colonists on the planets. "Standard weapons are having no effect," reported the weapons officer. "The energy passes right through their hulls." "Jake, can you do anything?" Kate asked. Jake was already moving toward the ship's main gun turret. "I can try to channel soul fire through our weapons, but I'll need help. Carl, can you assist?" The young Marine nodded, though he still looked weak from his first attempt at using soul fire. Together, they made their way to the weapons control room. In the turret, Jake placed his hands on the main gun's targeting system. He closed his eyes and concentrated, remembering everyone who had died in the attacks, everyone he had failed to save. The warm red light began to glow around him, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire room. Carl put his hands next to Jake's and added his own faint glow to the mix. Other crew members who had been watching joined them, placing their hands on the weapons console. Most of them could not produce soul fire yet, but somehow their presence made Jake's light burn brighter. When Jake fired the gun, the energy beam that shot out was unlike anything the shadow ships had encountered. Instead of the cold blue plasma the human ships normally fired, this beam burned with warm crimson light. When it struck the leading shadow ship, the vessel screamed, actually screamed, a sound that somehow carried through the vacuum of space. The shadow ship began to change. The dark metal that formed its hull started to crack and fall away, revealing something underneath that glowed with soft white light. For a moment, Kate could see that the ship was not really a machine at all, but some kind of living creature that had been corrupted by the same force that created the shadow beings. The other shadow ships pulled back, retreating to a safe distance. They had not been destroyed, but they were clearly hurt and confused by what had just happened. "We hurt them," Jake said, breathing hard from the effort, but using the soul fire on that scale. He looked down at his hands, which were shaking. When he looked up, Kate could see that the gray in his hair had spread, and the lines on his face had deepened. "How do you feel?" Lisa asked, immediately scanning him with her medical equipment. "Like I just aged 5 years in 5 minutes," Jake replied. "But it worked. We can fight them. We just need more people who can use soul fire." Kate looked out at the shadow ships, which were still keeping their distance, but had not retreated completely. How long will it take to train a significant number of people? Weeks, maybe months for basic ability, Jake said. Years to master it properly, and not everyone can do it. It requires a specific kind of personality, a specific kind of determination. Then we need to buy time, Kate decided. And we need to find every human with the right kind of spirit. She turned to her communications officer. Send a message to every human world, every ship, every outpost. We're looking for volunteers for a new kind of military unit. People who are willing to sacrifice years of their life to save humanity. What do we call this unit? Tony asked. Kate looked at Jake, whose hands were still glowing faintly with soul fire. The Crimson Guard, and Jake Martinez is going to train them. Jake nodded, accepting the responsibility despite knowing what it would cost him. We'll need a place to train them, somewhere safe from attack. I know just the place, Kate said. There's an old fortress station in the Vega system. Hidden, heavily shielded, perfect for what we need. As the human fleet began to withdraw from the battle, Kate watched the shadow ships let them go. The creatures were learning caution, which meant humanity had gained something precious. Time to prepare. But time was also something they were running out of. The shadow creatures were spreading across human space faster than ever, and now they knew that humans could fight back. The next encounter would be much more dangerous. Kate looked at Jake, who was already making plans for training the first class of Crimson Guard. She hoped they could find enough volunteers with the right spirit. Because if they could not, humanity's brief moment of hope would end in darkness. The training facility on Vega Station buzzed with activity as dozens of volunteers from across human space gathered for the first official Crimson Guard training program. Jake Martinez stood in the center of the main training hall, watching the newest recruits attempt their first soul fire exercises. Most of them failed. Focus on what you're protecting, not on making the light appear, Jake called out to a group of struggling Marines. The soul fire comes from your will to keep fighting, not from trying to force it. Among the trainees, a few showed real promise. Sarah Kim, a former colony defense officer who had lost her entire unit to the shadow creatures, could maintain a steady glow for almost 10 minutes. Marcus Webb, a young pilot whose family had been taken in the first attacks, produced bursts of brilliant light that could have powered a small ship. But for every success, there were 3 failures. Many volunteers simply could not access their soul fire, no matter how hard they tried. Others could create a brief flicker, but collapsed from exhaustion after just a few seconds. Commander Alex Carter walked into the training hall, observing the exercises with his sharp blue eyes. Carter was a mystery to everyone on the station, including Jake. He had appeared 2 weeks ago, claiming to be from a classified military project, and his ability to use soul fire was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. How are they progressing? Carter asked, joining Jake at the center of the room. Slowly, Jake admitted. We're getting maybe 1 successful candidate for every 10 volunteers. And even the successful ones can only maintain soul fire for short periods. Carter nodded, unsurprised. It's not about raw ability. It's about finding people who have been pushed to their absolute limit and refuse to break. Most people have never faced that kind of test. Have you? Jake asked. Carter's expression darkened. That's classified. But yes, I have. More than once. Jake studied the older man's face, noting the premature gray hair and the deep lines around his eyes. Carter looked like he had aged decades beyond his actual years, which probably meant he had been using soul fire for much longer than anyone else. Volunteers need real combat experience, Carter continued. Training exercises aren't enough. They need to face actual shadow creatures to truly unlock their potential. That's suicide, Jake protested. Most of them can barely maintain soul fire for a minute. Then we'll start with small engagements, Single creatures, controlled situations. Carter turned to address the entire room. Listen up, everyone. Tomorrow we begin Phase 2 of your training. Real combat against captured shadow beings. The room fell silent. Many of the trainees looked terrified, while others seemed eager for the chance to finally fight back. Sarah Kim raised her hand. Sir, how do you capture a shadow creature? Our reports say they're nearly impossible to contain. Leave that to me, Carter replied. Your job is to be ready to face them without running away. That night, Jake found himself unable to sleep. He walked through the quiet corridors of Vega Station, eventually ending up in the observation deck where he could look out at the stars. The view reminded him of his home world, which had gone silent 3 days ago. Dr. Lisa Chun found him there an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. You should be resting, she said, handing him one of the cups. Tomorrow is going to be demanding for everyone. I keep thinking about my home, Jake said. My parents, my sister, all my friends from school. They're probably gone now, drained by those things. And I'm here training other people to fight when I should be out there saving them. Lisa sat down beside him. You can't save everyone, Jake, but you can save some people by training others. To fight, that has to be enough. Carter says I'm holding back during training, that I'm not pushing the recruits hard enough because I'm afraid of getting them killed. Are you afraid? Jake considered the question. Yes, these people are volunteering to burn years off their lives to fight monsters that shouldn't exist. If I train them wrong, if I don't prepare them properly, they'll die, and their deaths will be my fault. But if you don't train them at all, humanity dies, Lisa pointed out. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. The next morning, Carter led the advanced trainees to a secured section of the station that Jake had never seen before. Behind multiple locked doors and energy barriers was a holding cell containing something that made Jake's skin crawl. The shadow creature inside the cell was smaller than the ones Jake had fought before, but it radiated the same cold hunger. It pressed against the energy barrier constantly, reaching out with hands made of darkness toward anyone who came close. This is a scout, Carter explained to the nervous group of trainees. Weaker than the full-sized creatures, but just as dangerous if you let it touch you. Your job is to enter the cell and force it to retreat using only your soul fire. Enter the cell? Marcus Webb's voice cracked with fear. Sir, that thing will drain us the moment we step inside. Not if your soul fire is strong enough, Carter replied. Jake, demonstrate. Jake did not want to go into the cell, but he could not show fear in front of the trainees. He activated the door controls and stepped inside, immediately feeling the temperature drop by 20 degrees. The shadow creature moved toward him with liquid grace, its void-like eyes fixed on Jake's face. When it reached out to touch him, Jake called on his soul fire, letting the warm red light surround his body like armor. The creature's hand touched the light and immediately pulled back with that glass-breaking scream Jake remembered from their first encounter. The being retreated to the far corner of the cell, watching Jake with what looked like a mixture of fear and confusion. See? Carter said to the watching trainees. It's afraid of the soul fire, but you have to maintain it consistently. And you have to believe in your own strength. Sarah Kim volunteered to go next. She entered the cell with visible determination, her hands already glowing with faint red light. But when the shadow creature approached her, her concentration wavered. The light flickered and dimmed. The creature sensed her weakness and lunged forward. Sarah screamed as its hand touched her arm, and Jake could see her life force beginning to drain away. Without thinking, he rushed into the cell and grabbed the creature, pouring soul fire directly into its form. The shadow being released Sarah and fled to the corner again, but the damage was done. Sarah collapsed, her skin pale, and her breathing shallow. Lisa immediately rushed to her side with medical equipment. "She'll recover," Lisa announced after a quick scan. "But she's been significantly drained. It'll take weeks for her to regain full strength." "This is too dangerous," Jake said to Carter. "We're going to get people killed." "People are already dying," Carter replied coldly. "Entire worlds are being emptied while we stand here debating training methods." These volunteers knew the risks when they signed up. Marcus Webb stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "I want to try next." "Marcus, no," Jake started to say, but the young pilot was already entering the cell. This time was different. When the shadow creature approached Marcus, his soul fire burned brighter than Jake had ever seen from a trainee. The red light surrounded him like a miniature sun, and when the creature tried to touch him, it actually caught fire itself, the shadow being burned with white flames instead of its usual crimson energy. And for a moment, Jake could see through its dark exterior to something underneath, something that looked almost human, trapped and screaming silently for help. Then the flames died down, and the creature retreated to its corner, but it looked different now. Less solid, less threatening. As if Marcus's soul fire had somehow purified part of it. "Interesting," Carter murmured, making notes on a tablet. "Very interesting indeed. What just happened?" Marcus asked, stepping out of the cell. He looked exhausted but proud. "You didn't just repel it," Jake realized. "You started to change. Your soul fire was different. Pure somehow." Carter nodded. "Some people have the ability not just to fight the shadow creatures, but to heal them. It's extremely rare, and it requires a very specific kind of personality." "Heal them?" Sarah asked from her medical bed. "You mean they can be saved?" "That's classified," Carter said quickly. "But yes, theoretically, the corruption that creates these beings might be reversible." Jake stared at the shadow creature in its cell, seeing it with new eyes. If the creatures could be healed instead of just fought, that changed everything. But it also raised new questions about what the creatures really were and where they had come from. "Commander Carter," Jake said carefully, "I think it's time you told us exactly what you know about these things, and about this classified project you came from." Carter looked around at the group of trainees, all of whom were watching him with expectant faces. Finally, he sighed and put away his tablet. "Very well. But what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. The shadow creatures aren't invaders from another dimension. They're refugees. And the real enemy is still coming." Commander Alex Carter stood before the assembled Crimson Guard trainees in the main briefing room of Vega Station. The holographic display behind him showed images that made everyone in the room go silent with fear. "What you're seeing is the Devourer," Carter said, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. "It's a force that consumes entire dimensions, leaving nothing but empty space behind. The shadow creatures you've been fighting are called the Vorthik, and they're running from this thing." Jake Martinez stared at the images on the screen. The Devourer looked like a living void, a darkness so complete that it hurt to look it directly. Where it touched reality, everything simply ceased to exist. "The Vorthik were once guardians of light in their own dimension," Carter continued. "But when the Devourer came, they had to choose between dying with honor or becoming parasites to survive. They chose survival, and the corruption changed them into what we see now." Sarah Kim, who had recovered from her encounter with the captured Vorthik, raised her hand. "If they're refugees, why are they attacking us?" "Because they need life energy to maintain their existence in our dimension," Carter explained. "Without it, they fade back into the void where the Devourer waits. They don't want to drain us, but they have no choice." Marcus Webb leaned forward in his chair. "You said some of them can be healed." Does that mean we can turn them back into what they used to be? Yes, but the process is extremely dangerous and requires massive amounts of soul fire. Most people who attempt it don't survive. Carter's expression darkened. I should know. I've tried it before. Jake studied Carter's face, finally understanding why the man looked so old and worn. The classified project you came from. You were experimenting with healing the Vorthik. For 3 years, Carter confirmed. We managed to save a few of them. And they told us about the Devourer. They also told us something else. The Devourer isn't just randomly consuming dimensions. It's hunting for something specific. Something that can stop it permanently. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Finally, Dr. Lisa Chun spoke up from the back of the room. What is it hunting for? A source of pure soul fire, Carter said. The Vorthik believe that if enough people with the ability can gather in one place and focus their power, they might be able to create a barrier that the Devourer cannot cross. How many people? Jake asked, though he suspected he would not like the answer. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. All working together, all willing to burn their entire life force at once. Carter let that sink in before continuing. The problem is we don't have thousands of people with soul fire ability. We have maybe 50, counting everyone we've trained. Admiral Kate Sullivan's voice came over the communication system. All senior staff to the command center immediately. We have a situation. The group rushed to the command center, where they found Kate staring at a tactical display that showed the entire human sector of the galaxy. Red warning lights were flashing everywhere. The Galactic Council has made their decision, Kate announced grimly. They're cutting off all trade and communication with human space. They've declared us a contamination risk because we can fight the Vorthik. What does that mean for us? Jake asked. It means we're on our own. No alien technology, no alien allies, no help from anyone. Kate turned to face the group. The Council is afraid that our soul fire might be contagious, that other species might develop the ability and become threats to their power. Tony Reed looked up from his communication station. Ma'am, we're also receiving reports of massive Vorthik fleet movements. It looks like they're massing for a major assault on the core worlds. Carter studied the tactical display. They know we're getting stronger. This is their attempt to finish us before we become too dangerous to them. How long do we have? Kate asked. Based on their movement patterns, maybe 2 weeks before they reach Earth, Tony replied. Kate looked around the room at the small group of humans who represented their species' only hope for survival. We need to accelerate the training program. Everyone who shows even basic soul fire ability needs to be ready for combat immediately. They'll die, Jake protested. Most of them can barely maintain soul fire for a few minutes. In a real battle, they won't last 30 seconds. Then we better teach them fast, Carter said, because if we don't, we'll all die anyway. Over thee. Next week, Vega Station became a place of desperate activity. Every human with even a hint of soul fire ability was pushed to their limits and beyond. Jake found himself training people around the clock, showing them how to focus their inner fire into weapons and shields. The cost was enormous. 3 trainees died from exhaustion, their bodies unable to handle the strain of accelerated soul fire training. Dozens more were hospitalized with severe fatigue and premature aging. But slowly, a core group of capable fighters began to emerge. Sarah. Kim became one of the best, able to maintain steady soul fire for over an hour. Marcus Webb discovered he could not only heal corrupted Vorthik, but also strengthen other people's soul fire by sharing his own energy. A former mining engineer named Beth Clark learned to channel soul fire through mechanical devices, creating weapons that could hurt the Vorthik at long range. But it was not enough. Even with their accelerated training, they had fewer than 100 capable fighters. Against the thousands of Vorthic ships heading for Earth, it would be like trying to stop an ocean with a handful of stones. "We need a different approach," Carter said during a strategy meeting. "We can't fight them directly with the numbers we have." "What are you suggesting?" Kate asked. "We go to the source. The Vorthic have a central command ship, something they call the Heart of Sorrow. If we can reach it and convert its crew back to their original form, the rest of the fleet might stop fighting." Jake stared at Carter. "You want us to fly into the middle of a Vorthic fleet and try to heal their leaders? That's suicide." "Probably," Carter agreed, "but it's the only chance we have. The alternative is watching Earth and every other human world get drained of life." Lisa Chun looked up from her medical reports. "Even if we could reach this command ship, the amount of soul fire needed to heal an entire crew would kill whoever attempted it. The human body simply cannot channel that much energy." "Not one human body," Carter said quietly, "but maybe several working together, sharing the load, supporting each other." The room fell silent as everyone realized what Carter was suggesting. A suicide mission where the volunteers would burn themselves out completely to save their species. "I'll go," Jake said without hesitation. "And me," added Sarah Kim. "Count me in," said Marcus Webb. One by one, other members of the Crimson Guard volunteered for the mission. Kate watched the volunteers with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. These people were willing to sacrifice everything for a chance to save humanity. How do we even get close to their command ship? Kate asked. Carter smiled grimly. "I have a plan for that too. But you're not going to like it." 3 days later, a small fleet of human ships approached the massive Vorthic armada heading for Earth. The ships were barely armed and looked like easy targets. The Vorthic fleet moved to surround them, expecting another quick victory. They did not know that the human ships were filled with volunteers, carrying the concentrated soul fire of their entire species. Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching the Heart of Sorrow grow larger on the screen. "This is it," he said to his team. "Remember, we're not here to destroy them. We're here to save them, and through them, to save ourselves." The warm red light of soul fire began to glow throughout the human ships as they plunged into the heart of the enemy fleet. Behind them, Earth waited to see if humanity's greatest gamble would pay off. The Heart of Sorrow loomed before Jake Martinez like a mountain made of shadows and despair. The Vorthic command ship was massive, easily 10 times larger than any human vessel, its dark hull writhing with corrupted energy that hurt to look at directly. Jake stood on the bridge of the human ship Determination, surrounded by his team of Crimson Guard volunteers. Sarah Kim checked her equipment one final time, her hands already glowing with faint soul fire. Marcus Webb stood quietly in the corner, preparing himself mentally for what they were about to attempt. Commander Alex Carter studied the enemy ship through the viewing screen, his weathered face grim but determined. "Remember the plan," Carter said to the group. "We board their ship, find the central chamber where their leaders gather, and begin the healing process. No weapons, no violence. We save them or we die trying." "What if they attack us the moment we step aboard?" Sarah asked. "Then we defend ourselves with soul fire, but we don't strike to kill," Jake replied. "These beings were guardians of light once. They're victims, not villains." The Vorthic fleet had detected the human ships, but seemed confused by their approach. Instead of attacking immediately, the shadow vessels held their position, waiting to see what the humans would do. "They're scanning." "U.S.," reported the ship's pilot, a young woman named Carol Nash. "But they're not getting any weapon signatures. I think they're puzzled." "Good," Carter said. "Confusion buys us time." The Determination's docking bay opened, and a small shuttle launched toward the Heart of Sorrow. Jake piloted the craft himself, guiding it toward what appeared to be a docking port on the enemy ship's hull. As they got closer, the temperature inside the shuttle began to drop rapidly. "The corruption is stronger here," Marcus observed, his breath visible in the suddenly cold air. "I can feel it trying to get inside my mind." "Focus on your soul fire," Jake advised. "Let it keep you warm, keep you centered." The shuttle touched down in what looked like a docking bay, though the walls seemed to be made of living shadow rather than metal. Jake and his team stepped out onto the dark floor, their soul fire providing the only light in the oppressive darkness. The interior of the Heart of Sorrow was like walking through a nightmare. Corridors twisted in impossible directions, and the walls pulsed with veins of crimson energy. Strange whispers echoed from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in languages that predated human civilization. "This way," Carter said, consulting a device that glowed faintly in his hand. The central chamber should be deeper in the ship. As they moved through the corridors, they began to encounter individual Vorthik. The shadow beings watched them pass, but did not attack. Instead, they seemed curious about the warm red light that surrounded the humans. One Vorthik approached Marcus, reaching out with a hand made of darkness. When Marcus did not pull away, the creature touched his shoulder. Instead of draining his life force, something unexpected happened. The creature's form flickered, and for just a moment, Jake could see what it had been before the corruption took hold. The being had been tall and graceful, with skin that glowed like starlight, and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. It had been beautiful in a way that humans could barely comprehend. Then the moment passed, and it was a shadow creature again, but now it looked at Marcus with something that might have been hope. "They remember," Marcus whispered. "Deep down, they remember what they used to be." The team continued deeper into the ship until they reached a vast chamber at its heart. Here, dozens of Vorthik leaders gathered around a pulsing sphere of dark energy. These beings were larger and more powerful than the ones they had encountered before. Their forms more solid and defined dot at the center of the group stood the largest. Vorthik of all, a being that radiated authority and ancient pain. This had to be their leader, the one Carter called the Sovereign. "That's our target," Carter said quietly. "If we can heal the Sovereign, the others will follow." Jake stepped forward into the chamber, his soul fire blazing brighter than it ever had before. The Vorthik leaders turned to look at him, their void-like eyes reflecting his crimson light. "We're not here to fight you," Jake called out to them. "We know what you really are. We know about the Devourer. We want to help." The Sovereign moved toward Jake with fluid grace, its massive form towering over the human. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of dying stars. "You cannot help," it said. "We are beyond salvation. We chose corruption to survive, and now we are lost to the darkness forever." "That's not true," Marcus said, stepping up beside Jake. "I've seen what you were before. You were guardians of light, protectors of life. That part of you still exists." The Sovereign looked down at Marcus with what might have been surprise. "You see our true forms? How is this possible?" "Because our soul fire comes from the same source as your original light," Sarah said, joining them. "We're connected, all of us. Light recognizes light, even when it's hidden by shadows." Carter walked forward, his soul fire burning so brightly that it illuminated the entire chamber. "The Devourer made you believe you had to choose between death and corruption. But there's a third option, redemption. The cost would be enormous," the Sovereign warned. "To purify beings as corrupted as we have become would require soul fire beyond anything your kind has ever produced. It would burn out every source of light in this chamber." "We know," Jake said simply. "We're prepared to pay that cost." The other members of the Crimson Guard entered the chamber, their combined soul fire turning the dark space into something that resembled a cathedral of light. Each human present began to glow more brightly, feeding energy into their collective flame. You would sacrifice yourselves for beings who have drained the life from your worlds? The sovereign asked. You didn't have a choice then, Jake replied. But we have a choice now. We choose to save you. The sovereign was silent for a long moment, studying the humans who had come so far to offer redemption instead of revenge. Finally, it knelt down to bring its massive form closer to their level. If you truly wish to attempt this, we will not resist. But know that if you fail, our corruption will spread to you. You will become like us, lost between dimensions, forever hungry for the light you once possessed. We understand the risk, Carter said. But we also understand what happens if we do nothing. The devourer will keep spreading, consuming everything in its path. This is our chance to make a stand. Jake placed his hand on the sovereign's arm, and immediately felt the full weight of its corruption trying to drag him down into darkness. But instead of pulling away, he poured his soul fire directly into the creature's form. One by one, the other humans joined him, adding their light to his until the chamber blazed with crimson radiance. The process was agonizing, like trying to hold liquid fire in bare hands, but they did not stop. The sovereign began to change. The shadows that covered its form started to burn away, revealing the being of light that lay beneath. But the transformation was not without cost. Jake felt years of his life flowing away with each second, his hair turning white, his face aging rapidly. Around the chamber, the other Vorthic leaders began to transform as well, their corrupted forms dissolving to reveal their true nature. The sphere of dark energy at the center of the room cracked and shattered, releasing waves of pure light that spread throughout the entire ship. Jake felt his strength leaving him, his soul fire burning so brightly that his human body could not contain it much longer. But as he looked around the chamber, he saw that it was working. The Vorthic were becoming themselves again, guardians of light reborn from shadow and despair. "Thank you," the sovereign whispered as its transformation completed. Its voice was different now, warm and musical instead of cold and hollow. "You have given us back our purpose." Jake collapsed to his knees, his soul fire finally exhausted. Carter caught him as he fell, the older man's face showing the same rapid aging that had overtaken them all. "Did it work?" Jake whispered. Through the chamber's viewing ports, they could see the Vorthic fleet transforming as well. The dark ships began to glow with soft white light, their corrupted hulls becoming things of beauty once again. "It worked," Sarah said, though her voice was weak with exhaustion. "The entire fleet is changing." The sovereign stood over them, its form now radiating the same warm light that had once protected its home dimension. "Your sacrifice will be remembered for all time. But your work is not finished. The devourer still exists, and now it will come for this dimension to reclaim what it believes is lost." "Can you stop it?" Marcus asked. "Not alone," the sovereign replied, "but together with our restored light. And your soul fire combined, we may be able to create a barrier that even the devourer cannot cross." Jake smiled, feeling oddly peaceful despite his exhaustion. "Then we better get started. Humanity doesn't give up easily." The sovereign helped Jake to his feet, its touch warm and healing. "No, you do not. And that is why you may be the ones to finally end this ancient war." Outside the Heart of Sorrow, now renamed the Heart of Light, human and Vorthic ships worked together to prepare for the coming battle. Jake Martinez, prematurely aged but still burning with inner fire, stood on the bridge and watched the preparations. Humanity had proven that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from destroying your enemies, but from helping them remember who they were meant to be.